This is Paul Staley. I want to walk you through the how and where of filling out these forms. We're looking right now at a schedule of assets and debts. And we're going to see several different categories of property and a handful of different categories of debt. Each of these items should be completed if you have anything that matches the category. So let's start with item number 1. And you see in the far left column, it says number 1, real estate. And mind you, for nearly every one of the items on this form, and there are 24 items on the form, you will see words in italicized text, which tells you what information is required and what documents are mandatory to support the information that you're providing on the form. So looking at number 1, real estate. Here, usually most of us would simply list the street address of the property that we own, and some may have more than one property. And so for each property that you own, list that property. If the property is in your spouse's name and not yours, list that property. Now, the next column to the right says SEP Prop. That's a mangled abbreviation of separate property. In this column, what you want to do is indicate whether this is your or your spouse's separate property. Okay, that's really helpful if you know what separate property actually is. And separate property typically is going to be property that is acquired prior to the marriage or after the date of separation, or at any time if it's acquired through by a gift or inheritance. It actually may be easier to think of separate property as what it is not. Now, what it is not is community property, and community property is broadly defined as an asset acquired during the marriage with earnings. Okay, so fairly straightforward. Now the next category over is date acquired. Also pretty self-explanatory. Usually a month and year is adequate, but sometimes the actual date down to the day really does matter. For example, if you purchased a home the day before your wedding, that home is likely to be your separate property because it was acquired prior to the marriage. So, to err on the side of caution, of course, you can always simply put the exact date acquired if you know it. Moving to the next column to the right, current gross fair market value. Now, on real estate, you're going to assign a value a little bit differently than some of these other items. Real estate is the kind of property that usually you figure out what it's worth by referring to, ideally, an appraisal. Most of us won't have one lying around. And if the property is going to be sold or otherwise divided, then it's probably going to be necessary to get an appraisal anyway. So for $350 or $400, somewhere in that neighborhood, you can get a fairly authentic or authoritative answer to the question of what is the current gross fair market value of the house or other real estate. Okay, let's not move along just yet. You might also use a broker price opinion from a real estate broker or realtor. Try to avoid using estimated values from online services. These have tended to become less and less reliable over the years since the bubble in the real estate market sort of peaked back in 2005 or 2006. So best to have either an appraisal or a broker price opinion. All right, last column to the right, amount of money owed or encumbrance. Nobody uses encumbrance in everyday conversation, so think of this column simply as the amount that is owed against the real estate. And so you're going to want to attach here a copy of a monthly statement from the lender, which shows how much is currently owed on the real estate. Now, let me move back to this italicized text here, which asks for attached copies of the deeds with legal descriptions and latest lender's statements. If you want to comply with the language on the form and you don't have a deed lying around with a legal description, these are easily obtained typically from the county recorder's office in the county where the property is situated. You can usually obtain that online for a very modest fee, usually no more than a few dollars, less than 10, often less than $5. Let's move on to number 2. Household furniture, furnishings, appliances. And the italicized text says identify. Usually these items don't have significant value. Here's why. The current gross fair market value, that is in the second column from the right, really the way you want to value this kind of property is what could you get for this on eBay or Craigslist? Now, mind you, the question isn't what is someone else advertising their goods for on eBay or Craigslist. It's what do you realistically believe you could get for it? And that's a very different question. Be careful not to value this property at purchase price or replacement cost. Those numbers are not relevant. Okay, moving on to number 3. Jewelry, antiques, art, and coin collections, etc. And of course, here you're asked to identify what exactly it is that you have, and of course, the other 4 columns. Again, what could you get for this? Not top dollar at an antique shop. What could you get for this realistically if you were to sell this on your own? And by the way, for most of us, if we were to sell jewelry or antiques through a broker or antique shop or jewelry store, we'd be paying a fairly hefty commission. If you want to use that kind of value and you honestly believe it's realistic that the item would sell, you're going to have to factor in the commission that comes from selling it. Page 2 begins with vehicles, boats, trailers.